Moses split the Red Sea. Have you ever heard it? Have you ever heard the story of how Moses split the Red Sea? The funny thing is, Moses wrote that story, and he never said he split the Red Sea. The evidence can be found in Exodus chapter 14, verse 21. Moses says, "And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided." As you see in bold red print, I have a strong east wind. So Moses did not split the Red Sea. The wind, according to Moses, the wind split the Red Sea. So how did back in ancient times and even modern times do we come to know Moses as this miracle worker, as this worker of magic, as this magician? Well, it all has to do with the genius of Moses. And I discussed this in my last video, and I'm going to finish this discussion in this episode. So, Moses was of a mind that was so far advanced, that was so much more than what we think of as smart today, that what he did back in ancient times came off as magic and as miracles. But there's no such thing as magic. And to understand what Moses did, you must first understand who Moses is. And Moses is a genius. He works through science and his knowledge of science, but his knowledge of science is so profound and so much more advanced than anything the world has ever seen. They have no explanation for what he does and how he does it, other than it must be magic. It must be a miracle. So we're going to talk about the life of Moses, and we're going to summarize it, and we're going to look at it not through a fairy tale lens, but through a scientific lens. Because the Bible is not a fairy tale. The Bible is real life, and it happens on earth, on this earth that we live on. And on this earth that we live on, we know a few things. We know a few things to be true. We can discern certain facts from certain things that are not facts. For example, pink polka dot flying fire-breathing dragons do not just appear out of nowhere. We know this because we live in this world and we live on this earth, and we've seen a thing or two, and the thing or two has never been pink polka-dotted fire-breathing flying dragons. We also know that pigs don't fly. But sometimes when we read the Bible, it talks about these fantastic things that we can't understand or explain. And so our way to understand it is to attribute it to being magic, attribute it to being some kind of power, some kind of magical holy power that is just beyond our understanding. When in fact, no, it's just science. Okay. So I've titled this episode The Genius of Moses Part 2, because we're going to look at the man Moses, but we're not just going to look at the biblical narrative, because the biblical narrative is not our only window into history. We're also going to look at what Josephus has to say, and we're also going to look at what the Egyptian records have to say, and what history itself has to say. Because the Hebrew account, which is the Bible, and Josephus's account, they both come from Hebrews. They come from the Hebrew perspective. Well, the Egyptians have a perspective too. And we're going to include, when life teaches us what facts are, we're going to include what we know about life also. So pay close attention and listen to when I say, according to Josephus, or according to the biblical record, or according to evidence that we know to be true, or according to the historical record. Listen to when I say that, because I'm going to back up this narrative with evidence from the historical record, with evidence from the biblical record, with evidence from Josephus, with evidence from what we just know to be fact.
Okay.
And so you'll see how one narrative fills in the gaps of the other. Now, this is Bill Nye, the science guy on the left. He's a scientist, thus his nickname, Bill Nye, the science guy. You know what I'm saying? It's like a little title there for him. He's a scientist. That's Bill Nye there on the left. Now on the right, you have Ken Ham. Now Ken is also a scientist. He's also a teacher. Ken Ham is also the founder of the Creation Museum. Now what the Creation Museum is, it's a life-size model of what Ken thinks is Noah's boat, the story of Noah and the ark. Ken Ham here on the right has recreated Noah's ark. It's a life-size model filled with all Ken's interpretations of what the Bible says. So Ken Ham invites Bill Nye here on the left. Ken invites Bill to his Creation Museum. And you guys can check this out. Just, go on YouTube and type in Bill Nye versus Ken Ham. And they'll take you to this video where they have this debate at Ken Ham's Creation Museum. And what Bill Nye is attempting to explain to Ken is, look, I cannot prove whether God exists or not, but the things that we can prove in science cannot and ought not to be denied. And he's trying to explain to Ken, look, you go off into the deep end with your religious beliefs. Some of your religious beliefs go against what we know to be a scientific fact. For example, Ken Ham believes that the entire universe was created in 6 days. Now, I believe the story of Noah's Ark happened, but I do not believe in magic. I believe in science. So I agree with both of these gentlemen to a degree. I agree with Ken Ham in that, yes, Noah's Ark is a real story. It really happened. I agree with Bill Nye in the fact that he's saying science and what we can prove cannot, ought not, should not be denied. So he's trying to explain to Ken Ham, Bill Nye is, on the left, is trying to explain to Ken Ham on the right, that the world could not have possibly been created in 6 days. We have fossils that date back to millions of years ago, which means that the earth is at least millions of years old. Now, Ken Ham's argument is, yeah, well, we have fossils that date back to only 1,000 years ago. So the world can very much have been created in 6 days. And then, it's only really 2,000 years old, because we have fossils that have fossilized only within the last 1,000 years. And what Bill Nye is trying to say to Ken Ham is, he's like, well, goody gumdrops that there are fossils 1,000 years old, but there are also fossils that are millions of years old. So what Bill Nye is trying to explain to another fellow scientist, Ken Ham, is that If you have a fossil that dates back to 1,000 years old, well, you know the earth is at least 1,000 years old. And if you have other fossils that date back to millions of years old, the 1,000-year-old fossil that you found does not supersede them. It does not replace them. It does not trump them. What that means is now you have evidence that the earth is at least millions of years old. We also have evidence to show that the earth is much older than millions of years old, but in fact is around 4.5 billion with a B, billion years old. So Bill Nye, the science guy on the left, he's not denying the existence of God. He's saying, hey, I don't know. I'll go with the science. I let the science lead me. I let scientific evidence guide me. And what he's trying to say is, well, we don't have evidence of God, so no, I can't say whether he is or isn't. But what I can say, what scientific evidence does show us, that is what I can speak about. And scientific evidence shows us that the world is billions of years old. Ken Ham here on the right, he should know better. He is a scientist as well, and in fact is a teacher. Well, he's a retired teacher, but he used to be a teacher. He should know better. He knows what Bill is saying is true. He knows that when Bill Nye, the science guy, says, look, some of the creations on earth, it took millions upon millions of years for it to be created. Certain ores that are found in the earth, certain fossils, it took millions upon millions of years for that to come about. And he's telling Ken Ham, you know better, but you've allowed your religious belief and your religious beliefs to trump what you know to be true. You've allowed your religious beliefs and your feelings and your emotions to trump the evidence that's right in front of your face. Remember this, folks. It's not about what the Bible says. It's about what the Bible means. If you don't know what that means, this is what it means. Context is everything. You will read things in the Bible and you will not know what they mean. You do not get to insert your understanding. And your understanding does not trump hardcore physical evidence. And the Bible even says so. Let me show you where. Genesis 8:22 says, while the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. What this is saying to you is the things that are proven facts, the things that we know to be true, that we can prove are true, that will never be. It says, while the earth remaineth. So as long as this earth is rotating and spinning and in orbit around the sun, which we know to be true as a scientific fact, as long as that fact remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night, all these things have to do with the earth's orbit around the sun. Seed time and harvest has to do with the seasons. It has to do with the weather. Cold and heat has to do with the seasons and the weather. It's directly tied to the Earth's rotation around the sun and the Earth's distance from the sun during its orbit around the sun. All these things, heat and cold, seed time and harvest, summer and winter, day and night, all these things happen as a result of the Earth's orbit around the sun. We also know that the moon's gravitational pull has an effect on weather because it produces our tides in the sea. So a lot of these off-Earth things influence the Earth and it influences the Earth, and it has a lot to do with why things the way they are on Earth, and they are all scientific facts, and the Bible says that will never change. That will never change. These are facts. These are facts that you can set your clock by. And we literally do set our clocks by these facts. So once you have facts, you don't get to just read the Bible and insert your understanding when you don't understand something. You don't just get to make something magic because you don't have a scientific explanation for it or just don't understand it.
Okay.
So this is how we must also look at the life of Moses. You can't look at it through this fairy tale lens, which is your imagination. What you have to understand is these are real life historical events that really happened in this lifetime. People thought Moses was doing miracles, not because he was an actual magician, but because he was a genius. And their small mind could not wrap itself around what his genius mind manifested in front of them. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So, what we have here is rubbing alcohol. And I'm going to use it to set my finger on fire. Now, I got water close by in case I have to put out the flames. Please do not try this at home. I did this demonstration to in front of my mom's like about a week ago, and I literally almost killed myself in front of my mother. Like, I totally set myself on fire and was beating out the flames in front of my mother. I got a big gash, burn mark on my leg. I don't know if you could tell, like my knuckles are all scarred up. I don't think you can see it right. Can't really see it that good, but my knuckles are all scarred up. I literally almost set myself and the entire house on fire in front of my mother. So hopefully this doesn't go that way this time. So I want to show you a little experiment. This is an experiment that my brother showed me when I was young. Okay, so I'm going to use the alcohol to set my finger on fire. But the alcohol shouldn't burn my finger because of science, not magic. So check it out.
Okay.
We got the alcohol. So, as you see, it was a safe and predictable experiment because I know the science behind it. See, alcohol is very flammable, but it evaporates quickly. So when I douse my finger in the alcohol, I can safely set it on fire without burning myself because the flame is going to immediately be attracted to the most flammable material, which is the alcohol. Now it's going to quickly burn through the alcohol because alcohol evaporates quickly. So I only have a little time to show you this experiment before I actually hurt myself. Now, to those of you who already knew that and have already saw that trick, then that meant nothing. But if you were a little kid, I could convince you that I was a magician. I could perform this scientific demonstration in front of you and you would be in awe and wonder. I'm like, oh my God, he's the Human Torch.
Okay.
Well, that's what we're talking about when we talk about Moses. He was of such an advanced mind when it came to science, when it came to life. He spoke several different languages. We'll talk about that later on in this episode. He was familiar with astrology. Growing up in Egypt, he would have learned about math and science and the stars. And his genius mind would have absorbed everything like a sponge, and he would have understood it better than the people who were trying to teach it to him. What I'm trying to show in my last episode and this episode is that Moses did not perform miracles. The genius of Moses was in itself the miracle. Moses was the miracle. So we're going to summarize Moses' life. We're going to use the historical accounts, the biblical accounts, and Josephus' accounts to fill in gaps everywhere and get a nice, sweet, pretty picture, okay? So here we go. Are you ready? Let's go. This is Egypt. Take a very good, long, and close look at this picture, because the Bible gives us a tale about foreigners living in the land of Egypt. And this is Egypt. So in order for the biblical tale to be true, we must look through Egyptian history to see if we can find an account that matches the biblical tale. And in Egyptian history, there is only one time where foreigners are living in Egypt in the numbers that the biblical narrative says they are. That is during the Hyksos occupation of Egypt. So let me explain to you what that was. Egypt has always been divided in two: Lower Egypt, there at the north, and Upper Egypt, down in the south. The reason for that is the direction the Nile River flows. It flows from south to north. So the south is considered the top, thus the south is considered Upper Egypt, even though it's in the lower regions. Lower Egypt, where the Nile River empties out into the Mediterranean Sea, is considered the tail of the Nile River. Also notice, Egypt is a desert. Besides this vein of green, which is the Nile River and the areas around the Nile River, Egypt is a desert. All of Egypt's cities are centered around the Nile River. It is the heart and lifeblood of this land. Notice at the top, there's a big green triangle. The Nile River snakes through Egypt, and at the top, at Lower Egypt, it flowers out into a big green triangle. Now, when you think about Egypt, think of it on this wise. Green means money. So Lower Egypt is the richer portion of Egypt. That green triangle is a lot of fertile land. Lower Egypt is the most fertile part of Egypt. It is the best part of Egypt. So when the biblical narrative says that Jacob and Joseph and their family settled in the land of Goshen, which is the best part of Egypt, what they mean is somewhere in Lower Egypt, this green triangle at the top of your map. Throughout history, Lower Egypt has always been the financial arm of Egypt. It's where they make their money. They're not fighters. They're money makers. They're hustlers. Down in Lower Egypt in the south, things are a bit different. They're much more traditional. They adhere to the old ways. They're scrappers. They're conquerors. Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt have not always gotten along. Back in the Second Intermediate Period, which was around 2000 BCE, 1900s BCE, somewhere around that time, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt went to war. It was a civil war. It was called the First Intermediate Period. And the way Upper Egypt brought Lower Egypt to heel was through muscle. Upper Egypt is the muscle, Lower Egypt is the money. Upper Egypt brought Lower Egypt to heel, and anytime there was a discrepancy between Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt used its money to bring Lower Egypt to heel. During the time of Moses, things were different. Once again, there was civil war in Egypt between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. But this time, the civil war was due to foreigners who had taken over the land of Egypt. Now, the Egyptians called these people Hyksos, but the Greeks called them the Hyksos. This is the Turin King list. It's an old ancient Egyptian papyrus. It's in shreds now, sitting in a museum. But it has the rulers of the Hyksos pharaohs. It has a list of their rulers and other rulers who ruled the land throughout Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. So what's going to happen is, around 1750 BCE, a 13th dynasty, an Egyptian dynasty, rules in Memphis. You'll see that here on the map. They're ruling in Memphis, an Egyptian 13th dynasty. In Lower Egypt, the Hyksos population has grown out of control. And by 1700, they form a 14th dynasty, a dynasty of foreigners, to rival the Egyptian dynasty at Memphis. This is a time of pure chaos for Egypt. If you go down a little further, Abydos is the name of a city along the River Nile. They also start to form a dynasty, and so do they form a dynasty at Thebes. So you have all these dynasties popping up. By about 1690 BCE, a 15th dynasty emerges in Lower Egypt, and they swallow up the 14th dynasty, and they contend with the 13th dynasty in Memphis. Then, out of this 15th dynasty comes a Hyksos pharaoh named Apepi, and he is truly aggressive. He breaks up the 13th dynasty. He makes his way down south into Upper Egypt. He destroys the 16th dynasty at Abydos, and he contends with the 17th dynasty at Thebes. Now, Moses has to be somewhere in this time period. The Hyksos occupation of Egypt is the only time in history that you could fit the biblical story of the Hebrews into actual history. Only the Egyptians don't call these people or these foreigners living in their land, they don't call them Hebrews. This isn't a biblical account. It's the Egyptian historical records. They call them Hekal-Kesut, and they say that the Greeks call them Hyksos. Now, Hyksos means shepherd kings, and we all know that the Hebrews were shepherds. The Hyksos, the reason they were able to grow so powerful, even though Upper Egypt was the strength in Egypt, the reason they were able to grow so powerful was because an African tribe called the Nubians were invading from the south. They had their hands full. The Egyptians at Thebes had their hands full fighting these Nubians to the south, which allowed the Hyksos to the north to just flourish and thrive and gobble up land and territory and get really rich and powerful. When this Hyksos pharaoh named Apepi comes along, he gets really aggressive and he gobbles up land and marches all the way down south and has conflict with the pharaohs at Thebes. And he stomps out and obliterates anybody in his path. Once he gets to Thebes, he has a fight with the pharaohs at Thebes. And then all of a sudden, the fighting stops. Apepi disappears off the map. The pharaoh in Thebes that he's fighting, we know he dies, but we don't know what happens to Apepi. Almost 10 years later, Amose, the new pharaoh in Thebes, kicks the Hyksos people out. But what happened to Apepi? He was fighting Kamose, who is Amose's older brother. He's fighting Kamose, and then they just stop fighting. Kamose dies, and Apepi disappears. Well, a funny thing happens. Let's go back to the Turin King list, because it gives us a list of rulers who ruled the Hyksos dynasty. One of those rulers, he was the third from the last. His name was Kailun or Kailun. And we know that he was a great leader because we have the evidence to prove it. He was a great trader around the Mediterranean Sea. Kailun says, I nominate my son to rule after me. My son will succeed me. But that's not what happened. According to the Turin King list, a pharaoh named Apepi just shows up out of nowhere and takes over. He not only takes over rule of the Hyksos, but he takes over rule of all of Egypt. So who is this guy Apepi who just takes over rulership? Scholars will tell you that he usurped the throne, but there's no evidence of a fight. Who's going to just give up the throne without a fight? Well, the Bible says that Moses, after his encounter with the burning bush, just showed up in Egypt. It says he was famous all throughout Egypt. It says that Pharaoh and Pharaoh's servants were afraid of him. So you have the biblical account stating that Moses just shows up in Egypt and takes over, and you have the historical account that says these Hyksos foreigners were ruling Lower Egypt in the north. Kailun is the one in charge by about 1690 BC. He nominates his son to be king after him, but his son doesn't end up being king after him. This guy named Apepi just shows up and takes over like the biblical account says Moses did. Now, why is this guy named Apepi? Because when you become Pharaoh, you get to choose what people call you, like a rap name. And he just happens to choose the name Apepi. Do I think it's merely a coincidence that Apepi is an Egyptian god who is regarded as the devil? No, I do not. This man takes on the persona and the name of the Egyptian god who is considered the devil. And I think he does it because he has nothing but contempt for the Egyptians. So Apepi, once he takes over the Hyksos dynasty, he marches down and destroys the 13th dynasty in Memphis. He marches down and destroys the 16th dynasty in Abydos, and he gets to the doors of Thebes, and he has a fight with Seqen-enre-Tao, the ruling pharaoh, and executes him. He then contends with Seqen-enre-Tao's son, Kamos, and all of a sudden the history books say they disappear. We know Kamos dies because his mom takes over rulership until his younger brother Ahmose comes to age. When Ahmose comes to age, he kicks out the Hyksos. But what happened to Kamos and Apepi? Where did Apepi go? Scholars will tell you he just died, but there's no evidence that he died. There's no tomb. Kamos says he killed Apepi and destroyed his capital city at Avaris, but we know that's not true. We know Kamose says he killed Apepi, but we know that's not true because Kamose also says that he destroys Apepi's capital city, Avaris, in Lower Egypt. We know that's not true because it's Kamose's younger brother, Ahmose, who destroys the capital city of Avaris years, at least more than 10 years after Kamose dies. So Kamose dies, and 10, 12 years later, his younger brother Ahmose comes along and actually does destroy the city. So we can't believe Kamose when he says, I killed Apepi and I destroyed the city, because we know for a fact he didn't destroy the city. So what happened to Apepi? Well, the biblical narrative will fill in the gaps. It says that they left Egypt. That's why you have no account of Apepi dying. That's why he just seems to disappear from the history books, because the Bible says that this fight, once Moses was contending with Pharaoh, that the fight left Egypt into the desert. So in the Egyptian records, we have this Hyksos foreign pharaoh named Apepi marching down to Thebes, fighting with the pharaoh, and then they just disappear without explanation. The explanation is they left. The Bible, the battle, the fight between them spilled out into the desert. So in the history books, it just seems like they disappeared. Kamos comes back dead, drowned in the Red Sea. They bring back his corpse. That's why we have his mummy to this day. But there's no record of Apepi because he left. Now let's just go back for a minute before Apepi. Let's go back to, say, 1750 BC, where you have this 13th dynasty ruling in Memphis. By 1700 BC, a 14th dynasty of foreigners pop up in Lower Egypt. Now, if you're a slave, Lower Egypt is more hospitable for you if you're a Hyksos slave. These people started off as slaves, but we know not all of them were slaves. What you got to understand is Egyptians are going to mingle and mix with these people. If I'm an Egyptian diplomat and I sleep with an Egyptian slave, I'm not going to let my son be a slave, and I'm going to try to get him a job in government when he grows up. Furthermore, it's extremely hard to distinguish some of these Hyksos and Egyptians, especially once they start mixing blood. So you had some of these foreigners were in high places of office. Some of them were in Lower Egypt, were very rich. So that's why you have a large proliferation of foreigners coming out of Lower Egypt. And things are much more nicer if you're a slave, if you're living in Lower Egypt. Now, Upper Egypt, not so much. They adhere to the old ways and traditions. They're very religious, and if you're a slave, that's about the worst place that you could possibly be, is Upper Egypt. So in order to understand Moses, we have to understand the environment in which he came up. And it's also good to understand who his parents was. So let's go back to about 1690 BCE. Between 1685 and 1690 BCE. You have this 14th dynasty in the north, in Lower Egypt, who has come up. They're foreigners. That must give the people in Upper Egypt in the south a lot of hope, because they've went from slaves to now holding positions of power in the country. Even though that'll never happen in Upper Egypt, it still must have given them hope. Well, in Upper Egypt, there was a man, and it was around 1690 BC, according to my calculations. There was a man named Amram. And Amram was an advisor to the Pharaoh who ruled in Thebes. So around this time, 1690 BCE, there lived a man in the province or city of Thebes. The man's name was Amram, and he was an advisor to the Pharaoh at Thebes. Under this Pharaoh, a new law had been passed. The law was that all newborn boys were to be killed in order to stem the population growth of the Hyksos. This particularly concerned Amram, as he was one of the Hyksos people. Even more troubling for Amram was the fact that his wife was pregnant. Amram was a slave. He was an advisor to Pharaoh, but he was still a slave. And so this law applied to him. So that if his wife gave birth to a baby boy, well, you know the rest. So Amram was worried, okay? He's sick. Amram is telling himself, what am I gonna do? My wife is about to give birth. Thank God she's not showing, which I think is rather interesting in this story from the jump. His wife is about to give birth, and not really many people can even tell she's pregnant. So Amram doesn't know what to do. The Egyptian gods that he's been taught about his whole life have never done anything for him. Praying to them is futile. So he turns to the God of his ancestors, of his fathers' fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph. And he prays to this God what to do, because he doesn't know what to do. So Amram convinces his wife, he's living in Thebes, and he convinces his wife that they're gonna just leave it in God's hands. So his wife makes a basket out of reed and mud, basically, and sends it up the river Nile, mind you. Just so happens that the princess, Pharaoh's daughter, is taking a bath in the river that day. And she and her servants come upon a basket with this lady's baby in it. Now, mind you, let's go back to Amram's wife. When Amram's wife gives birth to this baby, the first thing she says to herself is, damn, that's a good looking baby. The Bible says, she says, this is a goodly child, but I'm translating over to you in Negro understanding in terms. She's like, damn, what the hell then came out of me? Did I just give birth to a diamond? This kid is a jewel. Damn, this is a good looking kid. But the Bible says, she said, this is a goodly child. He looks good. He looked good, healthy, sturdy, you know? Well, funny thing is, the princess of Egypt, Pharaoh's daughter, says the exact same thing when she sees this child. She names him Moses because the word for water in Egyptian is mo, and the word for being saved from water is usis. Put the two together, you have Moses or Moshe. So she sees this baby. The first thing she says is what the mom said. This is a goodly child. Man, who had this kid? Aphrodite? I mean, who gave birth to this gorgeous kid? Was it Isis? Was it the Egyptian goddess herself, Isis? So here you see Moses' little sister. She's a servant of the princess. She just pops up out of nowhere. She's like, hey, princess, how you doing? Hey, what you got there? One of the little Hebrew babies. That's one fine looking kid. You should keep him. If you want to know where God is, he's not smoke coming out of a genie's lamp. Look at Moses' sister popping up out of nowhere, defending this child, convincing the princess she should keep him. If you want to find God, look no further than Moses' sister. He's working through her. Don't look for a ghost. Don't look for a genie in a lamp. Look for something real and tangible happening in real life history in front of your face. Don't look for magic. Look for science. This little girl just pops up right at the right place, the right time. She's been following her baby brother in this reed basket all the way to the princess's arms, and she just pops up. If there's any poof in the world, that's how this girl pops up out of nowhere. Like, hey, princess of Egypt, how you doing? Nice kid there. Oh, he's a good looking kid there. Oh, where'd you get him from? You should keep him. So Moses, the funny thing is, he won't nurse from an Egyptian breast. He won't nurse from an Egyptian breast. The little girl, Moses' sister, says, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you have me go fetch one of the Hebrew women? Maybe he'll feed off of a Hebrew breast. So naturally, the princess of Egypt says she thinks it's a good idea. She says, you know, you have a point, little filthy Hebrew girl. Go fetch me a Hebrew tit. So what does Moses' sister do? She goes and gets their mom, their biological mom, and Moses feeds from his mom's breast, which he's been feeding from. And what does the princess of Egypt do? She says, you know what? I nominate you to wean this child till he gets off the breast. Since he likes your breast, you'll come around, or we'll bring him around for him to feed with you every so often on a schedule till we don't need you anymore, filthy Hebrew woman. Thank you. And so he does. Now, when Moses is a baby, about 3 years old, the princess brings Moses to her father so that he can see him. She wants to show off this great Hebrew baby that she's keeping as a toy. She's like, oh, daddy, can I keep him? Can I keep him? And her father, he's the Pharaoh and ruler of Thebes and all of Upper Egypt. He says, of course you can keep this filthy Hebrew baby. You're my daughter. I will give you all the filthy Hebrew children if you should so ask me. She's like, no, I'll just play with this one. So she keeps Moses, and in a gesture of kindness and endearment to his daughter, Pharaoh takes off his diadem or his crown and puts it on Moses' head. But Moses throws, according to Josephus, Moses throws the crown down and kicks it. Now when Pharaoh's advisor sees this, he pulls out a knife and tries to gut the baby Moses. He wants to cut his throat. Now, if you're an observer in the room at this time, you're saying to yourself, what is this dude's problem? He just pulled a knife and tried to kill and murder a kid. not only in front of the kid's foster mother, which is the princess, but in front of the king himself. He just unsheathed his blade and tried to murder this baby in front of Pharaoh himself and in front of the kid's mother, Pharaoh's daughter. Now, if you're a person in a room that don't know no better, you think this guy's crazy, and you're the most ignorant person in the room, because the wise people in Egypt know about a prophecy. And the prophecy says that one of these Hebrew children is going to be born and bring down Egypt. The prophecy says that there is going to be a child born to the Hebrews who will bring the Egyptians very low and in the process raise the Hebrew people very high. This guy with the knife, he feels that he's literally staring the prophecy in the face. Literally, he's like, are you crazy? You're gonna let that thing live? My God, that's the thing of the prophecy. Kill it. Kill this child. He even says to the Pharaoh, he says, Pharaoh, it is he. It is he. This is the child of the prophecy. This is the child that the prophecy spoke of. Kill it. Kill it. Now, if you're looking for God, look for circumstance. Just like the circumstance with Moses in the princess's arms and his sister popping up out of nowhere. Look at the circumstance. Don't look for a genie in a lamp. Don't look for a poof in a cloud of smoke. Look at the circumstance, and that's where you'll find God. Because no way in hell this dude is gonna get away with killing Pharaoh's daughter's foster kid. No way in hell this dude is gonna get away with killing Pharaoh's daughter's bunny rabbit. He knows that Pharaoh will have his ass chewed up and spit out. He knows that his head will be on a spike by sundown if he kills that kid. If he kills Pharaoh's daughter's foster son in front of his baby. I mean, come on, dog. You know better. He knows better. That's why he didn't do it. So Moses narrowly escapes death. And let me just tell you something. As you see what this tells us, this is evidence that this child's life was in danger from the very beginning. This guy who pulled the knife, is he wrong? He feels that put yourself in his shoes. In his mind, I'm literally staring the prophecy in the face. There's a prophecy that a child born of the Hebrews is going to destroy us. And here one day you have, out of the clear blue, this beautiful baby drifting up the Nile River and landing on your doorstep. Can you all not see? That's what he's thinking. Now, this is evidence that from day one, Moses' life is in danger. Let me tell you about people who are trying to kill you. And I'm speaking from anecdotal evidence, which means my own personal experience. When people are out to kill you, they don't stop. They don't just decide one day they don't want to do it anymore. The purpose of someone trying to kill you is that they want you out of the earth. They don't want you to die later of natural causes. They don't want you to get hit by a car 10 years from now. They want you to die today. And if they can't kill you today, then they'll settle for tomorrow. And if they can't do it then, they'll settle for a week from now, a month from now, or years from now. And it won't leave their mind. They will always want to kill you until something stops them or until they die. People who want to kill you plot to kill you. You are a threat to them. They view you as a threat, and you will never not be a threat until you are out of sight, out of mind, or dead. That's what people who want to kill you act like. They don't just jump up and decide one day they don't want to fight anymore, that they're going to let bygones be bygones. People who want to kill you are going to do just that. They're going to try to kill you. So this guy who tried to cut and gut baby Moses, You think he was just letting bygones be bygones? You think he was the only one who wanted to kill Moses? There were plenty of people who felt like this guy. But there were also plenty of other people who felt like, hey, this kid could be an asset to us. As baby Moses grows and becomes a boy, he proves to be a genius. His teachers notice that he is far more advanced than any other kid in his age group. He is far more advanced than any other kid in any age group. He is far more advanced than any kid his age should be. He's far more advanced than the adults. So if you're one of Moses' teachers, you're thinking to yourself, look, this kid, he's really smart. He's the smartest kid I've ever seen. But the Bible, Josephus says in his book, The Antiquity of the Jews, that Moses conducted himself accordingly. He conducted himself appropriately. What that means is Moses is aware of the situation. What that means is, what Josephus means when he says Moses conducts himself appropriately and accordingly, why would he do that? Well, because he knows what's going on. He knows that there are people out to kill him. You think he doesn't know? This kid is a genius. Even his teachers say so and acknowledge the fact. You think his genius mind can't pick up on the little sly jest that people say to him? You think that his genius mind can't figure out the insults that people say to his mother in front of him to her face? You think people aren't picking on him? You think people aren't taking jabs at him? You think people aren't threatening him directly and indirectly? You think he can't pick up on any of it with his genius mind? Well, Josephus says he behaves himself accordingly and appropriately. So if you're one of Moses' teachers, you're saying to yourself, look, this kid is really smart, but he's not a god. Come on, he's a kid. All this hoopla, he plays with the other kids. He doesn't cause any trouble. He's just a little boy. He's just smart for his age. Little did Moses' teachers know that he's smarter than them. This little kid is already pulling strings. He has to. He has to pull strings. His life is in danger. The Bible says that Moses was the most humble person on earth. No man on earth was more humble than Moses. Well, why do you think that was? It all started from his childhood. Why would he be humble? Because he has to be. There are people trying to kill him, trying to murder him, trying to assassinate him. They are watching his every move, waiting for him to slip, waiting for him to do something that they can justify killing him for. And so with his genius mind, you would think that a kid shouldn't have to go through something like this, but Moses has the resources to deal with it, doesn't he? He's a genius. These men trying to lie to him, telling him that the dog ate their homework, these petty, feeble lies to his genius mind, he sees right through them. He sees right through you trying to be a fake and a phony. You want to try to lie to this kid? He's the best liar that ever lived. He doesn't lie because he doesn't like to, but he knows how. He sees a math equation and he can do it without you even showing him. He understands. He also understands how to behave appropriately. He understands how to make himself valuable to the Egyptians. He also understands how to not give them anything to worry about. This kid, the guy with the knife, he may have been right. He said, hurry up and kill this kid. Now, Moses is a young boy, and it may be too late. According to the guy with the knife, you've let Chucky roam around Egypt off the leash, free. This little kid, he isn't some little boy. He's Chucky. He's the devil, and he's roaming free around Egypt. And he knows what he's doing. Imagine being a dude with a knife. You've tried to gut baby Moses, and now he's 10 years old, and you're at the dinner table, and you look up, and 10-year-old Moses is staring at you. Think that would make you a little uneasy? He's got a look on his face like, yeah, I heard what you did. I remember what you did. Who knows what this little boy is capable of? But Josephus says he behaves himself accordingly. He's going to grow up to be the most humble man on earth. What Moses is doing is intentional. He is biding his time. He's saying to himself, I must survive. I cannot give these people any reason to hate me any more than they do. I'm a foreigner. Foreigners are getting killed left and right, and people want to kill me. You think he's not going to use his God-given talent to survive? I beg to differ. So Moses becomes grown. He's a grown man now. And all that genius that he had when he was a little boy, and all that he's learned up until now, he's a man, he's twice the mental monster that he was as a child. And so the Egyptians say to themselves, you know, this guy is still a threat, but we have also the threat of these Nubians. Maybe they can cancel each other out. So they pit Moses against the Nubians who have overrun Egypt. Let's go back. If you look at this picture, you'll see the Nubians are south of Thebes. But this is after Moses kicks them out, because before Moses fought the Nubians, they had completely overrun Egypt. The Egyptians put Moses against the Nubians. This was the first time we get to see his mental genius ability at work. He defeats the Nubians handily in spectacular form. He not only kicks the Nubians out of Egypt, he comes home victorious to Thebes, and he's married to the Nubian princess. They're now an ally of Moses. In the historical record, we see the Nubians to the south of Thebes. So this is after Moses has kicked them out. So we know Moses is alive and exists during this Hyksos occupation period. Now by this time, Moses is a grown man. A 15th dynasty has emerged. A 15th dynasty has emerged in Lower Egypt, and they're contending with the 13th dynasty at Memphis. So that's what's happening on the ground in real time in ancient Egypt. Here's the thing about the Nubians and Moses. The Bible says Moses married an Ethiopian woman. Ethiopians are Nubians, or Nubians are Ethiopians. Ancient historians don't distinguish African tribes. Nubia was the African tribe south of Egypt. So when the Bible says Moses married an Ethiopian, what it means is a Nubian, because Nubians would have been considered Ethiopians. This pharaoh of the 15th dynasty that I say is Moses, his name's Apepi. We don't know his real name, but he spoke Nubian. We know he spoke Nubian because he wrote a letter to the Nubian king. We know he spoke Egyptian because he wrote a letter to the Egyptian king. So this was a really smart guy, this Apepi. He spoke several languages. He spoke Asiatic, which was his native language. He spoke Egyptian. He spoke Nubian. Moses was a really smart guy too. That's because Moses and Apepi are one. Let's get back to the record of Josephus. Josephus says that Moses, after defeating the Nubians, he comes back a hero. And already the Egyptians are looking for a reason to kill him. They say to himself, and they say to themselves, and they say to Pharaoh, you know Moses is gonna come back and try to declare himself king. He's won a great victory against the Nubians, and now he's gonna try to, use that to take your throne. But Moses doesn't do that. The Bible says he's the most humble man on earth. So when Moses comes back, the Pharaoh of Thebes reluctantly offers him a gift. He says, Moses, you're a hero. What can we do for you? And he sits and he waits to see what Moses is going to say. If he's going to try to say, well, give me all of the gold and give me all of the power and make me second in command, or I should rule Egypt. He's waiting for him to say something stupid like that. But this is a genius. He knows better. So what Moses asked for is genius. He says, these slaves in your land, they work 7 days a week with no break. Give them a day off. That's what I want for a reward. I want them to have at least 1 day off during the week. Now, let me explain to you why this is genius. It's genius. It's a win-win situation for Moses. He gets to do something for his people who are being oppressed and abused and literally killed and slaughtered. He gets to do something for them. He's one step closer to freeing them. Not far, he gives them a day off, 1 day out of the week. But it's better than what they started with. My uncle always said a little bit of something is better than a whole lot of nothing. And what Moses gives them is a little bit of something. He gives them 1 day's break from their labors, 1 day's respite from their hardships. He takes nothing for himself. That's why the Bible says this is the most humble man on earth. Not a man on earth was more humble than him. But this is also why it's smart, because it shows the Egyptians, I am not a threat to you. I'm not coming for the throne. I don't want your riches. I don't want your pats on the back. I don't want your prestige. I don't want your praise. Just give the people a day off and we'll call it even. I saved Egypt from total destruction. Now give the people a day off. To the people who want harm to come to Moses, what can they say? What can they say? If you're one of the people who didn't think Moses was a snake, you're like, see, I told you so. He's not a threat to us. He's no harm. He could have asked for anything. He asked for a day off for these people. How chivalrous. How chivalrous. So, Moses defeats the Nubians. He asks for a day off for the slaves, and he gets it. It gets to the point where Moses comes out one day and he sees an Egyptian beating the dog slop out of one of the slaves. And so he kills the Egyptian. Pharaoh hears about it, and Moses flees Egypt, a fugitive on the run. Now, there's something very special that I think is evidence in this particular part of Moses' story. Because understand this. The Bible says when Moses killed this Egyptian, he looked this way and he looked that way and buried him in the sand. Always remember, when we're talking about Moses, we are talking about a person of a genius mind. He doesn't make that many mistakes. He doesn't make that many errors. For a person with of his mental magnitude, if he thinks that he got away, it's because he's got a good reason to think he's gotten away. But he's found out. The Bible says he goes out to the land the next day or a few days later, and he sees 2 Hebrews fighting. He tries to break the fight up, and one of the Hebrews says, who do you think you are? Do you think you're the boss over us, that you can tell us what to do? What are you going to do? Kill us like you killed that Egyptian? And the Bible says when Moses became aware of that what he did was known. This is the clue. When Moses becomes aware that it was known, he fled. This is what I'm saying. Let me slow it down because I'm getting excited. Moses is a prince of Egypt. Even though he's a foreign prince, he has the luxuries at his disposal as any other prince. He lives in the palace. He's been educated, given the best education you can have on earth. He's privy to things that not many childs are privy to. Why didn't he stick around and try to plead his case? Why didn't he use some of his clout? Why didn't he say, no, I didn't do it? Is the Bible says, as soon as Moses became aware that what he did was known, he wasted no time. He didn't try to plead his case. He didn't stick around. He didn't say, I didn't do it. It's not true. He hightailed it out of Egypt immediately. Hebrew feet was kicking up dust across that Egyptian desert. And here's the reason why. Moses knew from childhood that he was a target that people wanted to kill him. And once he became an adult, and once he knew that it was known that he killed this Egyptian man, he knew that Egyptians finally had justification or an excuse to kill him. They didn't need a big excuse. They could have did it with a flimsy excuse. But now they had a big excuse. And he knew it. He did not try to plead his case. He hightailed it out of there immediately. His actions are evidence of a man who was already wanted dead before he committed the crime. He knew it. He didn't even try to plead his case. He knew his goose was cooked. So Moses flees. The Bible says he comes to a place called Midian. And while in Midian, he gets married, has a kid, goes on with his life, working for his wife's father, his father-in-law, Jethro. My question to you is, do you think Moses forgot? For all we know, Moses was set up with that murder. We don't know if that Egyptian was beating somebody he knew, beating one of his relatives. Regardless, do you think Moses forgot? Or do you think he's off over there in Midian seething, plotting his revenge? Do you think could it be Moses is sitting over there in Midian, he's saying to himself, they played me. Look how they did me ever since I was a kid. They've been trying to kill me ever since I was a kid. Now they gonna come up with this flimsy excuse. Now they gonna try to set me up, or now they gonna try to kill me for murdering this Egyptian dude who was murdering one of my people. They played me. I've went from living in an Egyptian palace to living in a desert tent. They played me. And they think it's just gonna end like this. Moses is thinking to himself, it's not just gonna end like this. Do they know who I am? Do they know what I am capable of? Just wait. Just wait and watch and see what happens. I'll show them. My fault. That's what I would be thinking. I can't cast those aspersions on Moses, but it's possibly he could have been thinking that. It's possible the whole time his genius mind is plotting and formulating a plan and just waiting for his opportunity to return. Then something very unexpected happens. While Moses is tending his father-in-law's sheep, he comes across something that he has never seen before. He can't explain it. He calls it a bush that is burning but is not being consumed. But he doesn't really know what it is. He's never seen it before. So you have this person of this genius mind who's pretty much knows it all and has seen it all, comes across something he's never seen before. And he learns. It gives him an idea. He says, this gives me an idea. But when he writes it down in the Bible, he doesn't say, it gave me an idea. He said, it spoke to me. He said, this thing was God and it spoke to me. But what Moses meant was, it gave me an idea. This thing that I've never seen before. See, the idea that it gave Moses, first you have to understand that Moses is a genius. He knows a lot about a lot of things. He knows about the stars. He knows about the environment. He knows about weather. And the other thing you must understand is Mount Sinai is a volcano, and it's an active volcano that has yet to erupt. And so Moses is learning. When he sees this so-called burning bush, he begins to learn. He understands. He knows something. He sees an opportunity. And what he sees is a storm that's coming. See, connected to Mount Sinai is another volcano in Greece called it's in Greece. It's in the Santorini area. And when it erupted, it was one of the most powerful eruptions ever on Earth in man's history, or at least while man has been alive. And it's called the Thera eruption. And so what it was is this little middle part here erupts, and it's such a huge eruption that it affects a lot of areas around where it erupted. This volcano is connected to the volcano that Moses is at Mount Sinai. And one of the things that Moses understands is environment and space and weather. He knows the effects of a volcano eruption. He knows how it's going to affect the weather. He knows how it's going to affect biology and different animals and insects and diseases around the area it affects. If you look at my arrow, Santorini eruption erupts around here in Greece. But the storm it produces from the fire, ash, and lightning that comes from this volcano, it affects all these places around Turkey, around Greece, and yes, as you see this little red bar, even down in Egypt. And we know that this eruption affected Egypt because we found ashes from the Thera eruption in the river Nile. And it gives us a specific date. It gives us in the 1500s is when this erupted, sometime in the mid 1500s. So around 1550 BC. And guess who's ruling Egypt at 1550 BC? It's a Pepi. He's making his way down the Nile River, and he's batter ramming anybody in his way until he gets to Thebes. And when he gets to Thebes, you have these miracles or astonishing weather events that happen. But I contest that Moses knew these things were going to happen. He knew that this storm coming from this active volcano was going to affect Egypt. He knew the effects it would have on Egypt. He knew the volcano he was at Mount Sinai was soon to erupt. He knew he was at an active volcano. He knew there was another active volcano connected to it. Matter of fact, he knew there were many active volcanoes that were connected that were about to erupt during that time. He knew that this Thera eruption would cause a catastrophe in Egypt. He says to himself, there's a storm coming. And I know about it, and nobody else does. I know the effects it has. Nobody else does. So you may be saying to yourself, oh, Troy, well, what are you doing? Trying to take God out of the picture? No, because what Moses realizes is he's a genius. And he knows that God is the reason he's a genius. He also knows that God is the reason he's looking at this burning bush. He's been lured here. He sees a storm coming. He knows that God is the reason this storm is coming. If you're looking for a sword to fall out of the sky, this is as close as it gets. Moses says, God is sending me a sword in the sky. He's delivering me. He knows I'm a genius. He knows what I'm gonna do. He knows this idea that I have, I'm going to credit to him. I'm going to credit him for giving me this idea. I'm going to credit him for bringing me here, showing me this bush. I'm going to credit him for me understanding that this is my calling. There's a storm coming. It's headed for Egypt, and I'm going to be there to capitalize. The Egyptians believe in magic. They believe in sorcery. I'm going to put on a show and demonstration for them they shall never forget. And so we have the plagues of Egypt. Now, the first plague, Moses turns water into blood. We all know this from the Charlton Heston movie, The 10 Commandments. But here's the thing about Moses turning water into blood. He saw this phenomenon before he got to Egypt. Here's the proof. Exodus 4:9 says, and Moses is on Mount Sinai at this time. It says, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice. I'm sorry, let me start over. It says, Exodus 4:9 says, and it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also these two signs, neither hearken unto thy voice, that thou shalt take of the water of the river and pour it upon the dry land, and the water which thou takes out of the river shall become blood upon the dry land. Moses is in Mount Sinai when this happens. So when he turns water into blood in Egypt, he's seen it happen before. He did it on Mount Sinai. From him doing it on Mount Sinai, he can predict that it's also going to happen in Egypt. So when he shows up in Egypt, he already knows that water is going to turn blood red. So he shows the Egyptians, he says, look, I'm going to pray to my God and this is what's going to happen. And he prays to God and that's what happens. And the Egyptians, they're a little impressed. They're not that impressed because his advisors and magicians, they can do some of the things that Moses can do, but they're not the genius that Moses is. And so Moses has several more plagues to come. He says, I'm going to pray to my God and frogs are going to come. Now Moses knows good and damn well that everything in the river is going to die when the river turns blood red. The only things that's going to survive are the things that can get out of the river, which are frogs. So Moses knows this is going to happen before it happens. Thus, Moses is a great prophet. He's predicting the future. He prays for frogs and frogs come. This is from the Egyptians' eyes. Look, this dude prays to frogs and frogs come. Let's go back to when Moses is fighting Chamos on this map. Moses marches down from Lower Egypt. He crushes the 13th dynasty. He marches down to Abydos. He crushes the 16th dynasty. He gets into a fight with Chamos' father, Second Enre-Tau. He crushes Second Enre-Tau, executes him. We've got the axe marks on Second Enre-Tau's mummy's head to prove it. He then gets into a fight with Kamose, Second Enre-Tau's son. And this is what Kamose says about Moses. Listen to what Kamose, the last pharaoh in Thebes, the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty. Listen to what he says about Apepi. He says, I hate this guy. He's a foreigner. He's an Asiatic. Hebrews are Asiatic. He says this foreigner, his roots are from the land of Retanu. The land of Retanu is the Egyptian word for the land of Canaan, which is modern day Israel. He's literally doing everything but saying this guy is Moses. He says this guy Apepi, I want to rip open his belly. He says, but I must be careful. This Apepi, he's tricky, dude. He is a tricky dude. Look what he did to my father. He says, I'm not going to make the same mistakes as my father. He tricked my father and killed him. He said, this is an extremely crafty, tricky dude. This is the word, this is the symbolism that Kamose uses to describe Apepi, that he is divine. What Kamose is saying by using the symbolism that Apepi is divine, he's saying, this dude he uses sorcery. He performs miracles. I hate him, but I have to be careful. He is no joke. He's a sorcerer. He's a demon. He's the devil. He does miracles. That's what Kamose says about Apepi. And I say Apepi is Moses. And the divine that Kamose is talking about, he's talking about the 10 plagues of Egypt, the 10 miracles of Moses. Now, after all the frogs die, what's going to be left? There are no frogs to control the insect population. Lice and flies come. There's no controlling the fly and lice population. They spread disease. The cattle get sick. So you have blood, the water turning into blood. Then you have an outbreak of frogs. After you have an outbreak of frogs, then there's lice and flies which spread disease. All the cattle die. All of this is predictable to someone with the genius mind of Moses. He knows science, he knows disease, he knows pathology, he knows biology, he knows astrology better than anyone. He knows meteorology, he knows the laws of nature, the laws of physics, algebra, geometry. He understands it on a superior level. You cannot contend with this man. So next, all the cattle die. What's after the cattle? Boils. Moses throws up dust in the air, and I ain't gonna lie, I don't know the scientific reason how he did this or how he knew this, but I know it's scientific, and I believe he knew it was gonna happen beforehand. He throws up dust in the air, and pretty soon, days later, everybody's getting all these boils. Pharaoh, even the royal household, nobody escapes it. And mind you, all these plagues are falling on Upper Egypt. They're not falling on Lower Egypt where Moses is. They're not hurting They're not hurting the Hebrews. They're hurting the Egyptians only, which adds to Moses' magic and miracle. And not only the humans are affected by these boils, but even the animals. Nobody is beyond Moses' grasp, it seems. Nobody is beyond his touch and his reach. He is a sore, he is a plague, he is COVID. They should have got the dude with the knife was right. You let Chucky run around Egypt and now he's grown up. Next was, after the boils, was fiery hail. We all know this happens as a result of a volcanic eruption where ice mixes with fire. So that's where you have the fire hail from. Fire because it was fiery, hail is ice. So it was a combination of fire and snow. This only happens with the eruption of a volcano. Next is locust. Do you really believe that locusts follow the command of a man? Moses knew this was going to happen. You have a huge volcanic ash storm that just hit Egypt. It's going to have an effect on the weather. It's going to have an effect on the animals. It's going to have an effect on the insects. It's going to have an effect on the ecosystem. It's going to have an effect on how Egypt makes money. After the swarm of locusts just came and destroyed all crops, the Egyptians are just getting hit with one plague after another. Moses is hitting them with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 rope-a-dope punch. He like Muhammad Ali. One place, 1 minute, jab, 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 disappear. He's right behind you. Hook, hook, hook. Body shot, body shot. He's just tearing Egypt apart. And here's another thing. Moses doesn't really know who God is. He thinks that God is the Egyptian god Seth. Here's how we know. Because a Pepi shows up on the scene, he takes over rulership out of nowhere, and he tells everyone, you're to worship the god Seth now. He's the real God. Seth is an Egyptian god. What is Seth? He's the Egyptian god of deserts and storms. Where was Moses when he saw the burning bush? In the desert. What is controlling or bringing about all the plagues of Egypt? A storm. So Moses thinks that God is Seth. He thinks that Seth is on his side, and so do the Egyptians. The Egyptians say, Seth, he's not even the chief god. But he's with this man, Moses. He fights for him. The God of the desert fights for this man. So we know that Moses thought God was Seth because a Pepi's running around at this time telling everyone, worship the god Sotik. Worship our great god Sotik and only him. Moses was the first person in Egypt to worship one god. In Egyptian historical accounts, a Pepi is the first person in Egypt to worship one god. That's because they're the same person. But the historical Egyptian records teach you that Moses thought God was Seth because a Pepi is Moses, and he's running around saying, Look, he's even telling the other pharaohs that he's fighting with, you will no longer worship Amun-Ra, but you will worship Seth, our god Sotik, which is Seth. You will worship him exclusively. He's the real God. Now to the Egyptians, they're like, dude, this dude is a madman. Seth is like Judas in this Egyptian pantheon. He's a traitor. Why would you make him the chief god? But it's confusing to the Egyptians because this god Seth, who's supposed to be a lesser god, is helping Moses for some reason. He's bringing these plagues. He's bringing these storms. So after the locusts, we have extreme darkness. You got the boils, the fire hail, the locusts, then extreme darkness. And after the darkness comes the death of the firstborn. Now, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. This is the final blow to Pharaoh, because not only does his son die, but all of Egypt's firstborn die, including the firstborn animals. These people are pissed off. They're coming back to Pharaoh like, dude, get rid of these people. Enough is enough. We're sick of this evil sorcery, this evil magic, this humdoolery, this humdickery that's going on. Enough is enough. Get rid of these people. And finally, Pharaoh has no choice but to get rid of these people. Now, here's the thing. You say to yourself, there's no way Moses could have predicted the weather and known all that stuff before it happened to the exact way that he happened. And he did have it down packed and precise to where he says, look, the frogs are going to be here by this day, and by this day they'll be gone. He had it predicted down to, I guess you could say, a science. So you may say to yourself, well, this is impossible. There's no way a person could do that. Well, actually there is. And we do it all the time.
Being able to predict the weather by observing cloud formations is a skill that is somewhat lost on us modern humans. Most of us can easily look at a cloud and see the unicorn or ice cream cones, but very few of us can look at clouds and see the approaching cold front. Fortunately, being able to predict the weather is easier than one may think. Clouds can easily be broken into 4 categories. These categories are high clouds, middle clouds, low clouds, and clouds with vertical growth. Clouds are also identified by shape. Cumulus refers to a heap of clouds. Stratus refers to clouds that are long and streaky. And nimbus refers to the shape of rain, because we all know what rain looks like. High clouds form at 16,000 to 43,000 feet. Basically, these are the clouds that you only encounter on the top of really high mountains.
How does lightning form? Does it strike up or down? There are many outdated explanations still scattered among weather sites, vlogs, and whatnot, exacerbating misunderstandings about lightning. Over the decades, I've seen lightning do some freaky stuff. In this video, we're going to explore and explain the weird world of lightning. Thunderstorms have the ability to separate pools of positive and negative charges in and around them, thus creating powerful electric fields. Lightning is born between 2 oppositely charged regions, as a network of electrically conductive channels called leaders materialize and begin to tunnel a path.
I'm Fox 26 meteorologist Ramisha Shade, and we've got a lot to talk about in the tropics for your daily tropical briefing. We've got multiple systems out there in the Atlantic, one in the southeastern Caribbean that will likely turn into a major hurricane, unfortunately, and head.
So, what we see is, in modern times, people forecast the weather almost precisely sometimes. No, we get it wrong. We're no Moseses. We're no geniuses. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for someone to forecast the weather. And that's what Moses was doing. He forecasted the weather, but he did it in a genius way and put on a performance that just appeared magical. Furthermore, Moses comes from that stock. His great ancestors, the son of Adam, the son of Seth, were the world's first astrologers. It's in his blood. It's in his history. The sons of Seth predicted the coming of the flood thousands of years before it came, and they predicted it precisely and accurately. They also predicted that the world would be destroyed by fire, which has not yet happened, but which you could put a lot of faith and weight and credence in what they say, because they were right about the flood. What I'm saying is, Moses forecasted the weather. He did it in a genius way, without any instruments, without any technology, without the modern resources that we have today, because he's a genius. He's a genius. So he was able to do it without modern technology. He was able to do it in a way that nobody else could do but him. But the point that I'm trying to emphasize, and almost burning myself up by setting myself on fire by making these videos, is it's not poof. There is no poof. It's not magic, it's science. It's like Bill Nye the Science Guy said. We have things we can prove. It's like the Bible said. Harvest time, day and night, heat and cold, winter and summer, they will not cease. The things that we can prove, we know them to be true. Use these things that you know to be true to find out what you don't know. Don't add magic into it because you don't understand it. The miracle of Moses is the genius of Moses. And Moses is a peppy, because when you look at the biblical narrative, it matches the Egyptian historical records with a peppy. They mesh perfectly. So Moses goes on, he performs these miracles in Egypt, and he leaves. In the historical account, Pepe disappears off the face of the historical record. People assume that he died, even though there's no evidence. Kamose lies and says he killed him. We know that's not true. So what happened to Pepe? Well, the biblical narrative says Moses leaves Egypt. So why did Pepe and Kamose stop fighting? Well, if you look at the biblical narrative as a reason why, that's because they didn't stop fighting. The fight left out of Egypt. It went out of the country into the desert, where Pepe or Moses finishes Kamose off. So we get to the Red Sea, and Moses performs the greatest miracle of all. He divides the Red Sea, but yet again, we saw at the beginning of this episode, Moses never said he divided the Red Sea. He said something scientific happened. The wind pushed the sea apart, and he safely guided people out of Egypt. Now look at the many miracles of Moses and understand that it is not magic and sorcery that he is doing, but it is science that he's working through, and he understands that the originator of science is God, the originator of all the laws we live by on earth that will never change according to the Bible. They are written in stone. They are of God. So Moses is able to be so successful because he understands God. He understands how God works. He understands his place and position in the bigger schemes of things. So we've come down, I've wound down and used up all my time. We got a lot more miracles to discuss that Moses performed. But as we go on, what I want to show you with this episode is that though it may seem magical, we know it is not. We know this is a man of a genius mind that is performing these miracles, and it is the science behind what he does that may be too much or too far advanced for us to understand, but not for him. What he does normally looks like when I set my finger on fire if I did that in front of a bunch of 3-year-olds. That's the equivalent of Moses to us, is like me setting my finger on fire in front of a bunch of 3-year-olds. They probably jump up, run out of the room screaming, and tell their mommy and daddy the teacher set himself on fire and lived. So look, I hope you see the point that I'm trying to get across. I've rambled enough. I've taken up enough of your time. We're going to pick up on Moses with the Exodus. I'm not sure what part it is. We're going to pick up on Moses again, and we're going to continue, and you'll see the many miracles of Moses, but you'll know this isn't magic he's doing. You'll know this is as a result This is all a result of the genius of Moses. Yo, I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Son of a Preacher Man. As always, I am your host, the Soapman. Yeah, and all that. You know what I mean? I'm your host, the Soapman. I appreciate you taking the time out and hang out with me. I hope you learned something. If you got any comments, questions, insults, compliments, just want to chop it up with me, please leave me a comment in the comments section. And until then, I'll see you next time. Same soap time, same soap time. I'll see you next time. Same soap time, same soap channel. This is Soapman, son of a preacher man, and I'm out.